This story begins on an afternoon flight from San Francisco to Denver. After a few days in Denver for the Snow Sports Trade Show, SIA, Pat Branch was off to Salt Lake City with Libby Redepenning and some new friends. The day after they arrived, they went to Brighton to film some park laps. But that's another story. This story is about what it takes to capture unique shots of snowboarding in the streets and backcountry, avoiding the visual monotony of terrain parks at resorts. First night out, Pat set out to shoot with Libby and her California friends who were in town, Andrew Godot, Johnny Lucero, and Jody Odom. Jared Johnson, a writer Pat had shot with a lot in Mammoth that had recently moved to Utah, came out. The first spot, the rail had a fence in the way. At the second spot, they ran into a crew of skiers. Libby actually knew one. They agreed to set up different features and turn their lights on at the same time to lessen the chance of being caught. As soon as they had finished the jump and Pat had assembled his dolly, the cops showed up after a janitor had reported them. After an unsuccessful night, they ended up at Rail Gardens the next day. Rail Gardens is a park where people walk their dogs and snowboarders and skiers go to ride handrails without being hassled. It's like a skate park for snow sports. Joe Wheelton, a friend of Libby's, came out as well as Jared Johnson. Pat got a few more shots with Libby the next morning. After a few days in the city, Pat went up the canyon to Park City to stay in a house with several people, including James Bueller, Dave Van Artsendale, Philip L.G., and Alex Gavick. On the first shoot, Pat went to a zone behind Park City with James and Dave for some powder runs. The first spot they had in mind ended up being really tracked down. They went to another spot that was a bit fresher and started hiking up. Pat met up with Libby, Erica Vikander, and Melissa Ritano, who wasn't riding due to an injury, to shoot a ledge that Erica found up in the hills around some condos. Truck came by and asked who was in charge. Someone gave him the runaround and sent him to the lower road where a photographer was shooting. Pat told Libby and Erica to run up for another shot, figuring they had about a minute. Erica and Libby smooth talked him, got a few more shots in. Pat left Park City with Dave, James, Philip, and Alex Lockwood to check out some spots in the city. They went back to a handrail at a school that they shot a few nights before with little success. Later, Jared showed up and they met up with Ryan Flaska at another school for a gap over a rail. A few days later, Pat was back in the city with the crew filming Dave, Ryan, Philip, Alex Lockwood, and Alex Skavic. Pat met up with Dustin Linker after meeting him at an event a few weeks before. Pat shot Ryan Kittredge, Lynn Neal, and 2 riders they coach, Brady Durgan and Nick Brost, along with Claire Hewitt DeMeyer on some tree jibs. Getting up the mountain to the spot with all the equipment was easier said than done. About half the group hitched rides on snowmobiles up the snow-covered road by random luck. Pat was actually one of the lucky ones. Pat had directions to the destination, but they weren't quite detailed enough. He got off at what looked right and waited for a bit. He soon realized he may have gone too far. He strapped in, headed down, and fortunately found Dustin. Soon after the others caught up, Ryan had to hike the whole 2 miles, and he had 45 pounds of weights for the jib arm in his backpack. Pat planned a trip with James, Dave, and Philip into the backcountry of the Wasatch Mountains. After miles and miles of highway, they made it to Evanston, Wyoming, where they stopped at the Last Chance gas station for some quick food and gas for the sleds. After repacking the gear on the sled trailers at the truck, and then again when they started losing bags, they were on their way, or so they thought. Plan A came to an end when they couldn't find the trail they had mapped out. The snow was too weird to attempt riding on with the trailers. It was softer than what they had been on and unpredictable, making it too sketchy for pulling trailers loaded with camera and camping gear. Plan B happened. They rode back a few miles toward the truck, then up a snow-covered highway about 20 miles. They set up camp at a snow-covered lake. It was still dumping the next day, so Pat put some work into a snow cave, while James, Dave, and Philip explored the area on sleds. By day 3, it was still dumping, and they still didn't have one shot of snowboard. Everything was soaked, so they decided to call it and head back to the house in Park City. Pat brought some of the Wasatch crew to a gap over an electrical box between two fences he found. They ended up getting kicked out that afternoon after about 40 minutes and came back the next morning to their already set up spot. Brady, Fetty, Nick, and Ryan were hitting it, while Connor Ciccone was towing them in with the van. On a wet, early morning, Pat left the Wasatch Project house outside of Park City with Brady heading to Colorado. In Summit County, Colorado, Pat met up with Ryan Herkiewicz and Christian Mayers. They first met up for a morning shoot in the terrain park at Keystone. Pat had no use for park shots in his movie, so he shot stills instead. A few days later, it snowed in the city, and they went to Boulder to film for the day. Hans Mindnich and Seth Hill met up with them to film. with several spots in mind, but logistical issues, including lack of people to dig. Pat and Ryan went to the Silverthorne skate park to try their luck on a drop-in to a short spine with a coping. Before the previous shoot at the skate park, they were trying to come up with something really creative. Ryan knew about a junkyard and they checked it out. He realized they could set up a double rail feature out of old ski racks. They waited for some fresh snow and went back with Christian. This is where Niko came into the story. When they realized it was snowing again in the city, they made last-minute plans to go to Denver early the next morning for a big flat down rail below a freeway. They arrived and set up the jump and landing. All of a sudden, 2 plows came down the bike path, taking out the landing, and they had to rebuild it. Niko kept going for it without success. Christian hit it till he bruised his heel badly, ending his season, and Ryan landed it twice. Pat filmed Ryan and Niko on a rail he found several years ago around some condos while exploring Breckenridge. They set it up and then turned on lights when it was ready. Next, Pat, Ryan, and Niko went to a swing set rail below Summit County toward Vail. Niko crashed over and over but kept trying. He surprised them because he kept going for it there and at the big rail in Denver without having a lot of experience riding street features like these. One afternoon, Pat and Ryan shot a high-risk handrail in Frisco. Frisco has a rumor about cops confiscating snowboards and cameras when riders get caught. Pat and Ryan hadn't heard any first-hand stories about it happening, but they wanted to avoid it. They were in and out in about 15 minutes, setting up and then getting a few shots. Next, they went back to shoot some rails along the ski run that goes into town from Breckenridge Mountain. Brian and Christian had found this spot a week before when the mountain was still open. When we got there, we found some skiers that were just leaving and had already set it up. Pat, Niko, and Ryan next went to a rail under Breckenridge's Gondola. After they hit it a few times, it started running. Fortunately, none of the workers seemed to mind them. By this point, it was really feeling like California. Snow was melting quick. Pat, Ryan, Niko, and Andrew Agar went to an old restaurant at Breckenridge to set up several features into a line. After they set up and filmed a few runs, a two-person news crew showed up. They learned from the news crew that the restaurant would be torn down soon. They filmed the line until they were shut down by an employee who had a problem with it. Brian had been talking with Ryan, the photographer, about a very unique spot south of Summit County that they hadn't shot yet. He was going to shoot it with some other riders, but when they weren't into it, he invited Ryan because he knew he would be able to get creative on it. One early morning, Pat, Ryan, and Andrew drove down to Vail and met up with Ryan Briganti, Brandon Warr, and Taylor Brandt. From there, they continued south. When they arrived, they unloaded Taylor's sled and began transporting gear and everyone to the feature. This spot with concrete supports for a long-gone hangar was quite the unique and creative find. Andrew guinea-pigged the first feature and was done. He was going a bit too fast and the jump was a bit too close. When he hit it, everyone thought he was doing a speed show. Fortunately, Pat was doing a practice shot and the camera was rolling. Figuring out the ideal tow-in speed and how to ride the supports properly were the main issues. Taylor was injured, so he drove the sled, towing Andrew, Ryan, and Brady. The last place they went to was another spot Pat found when he was in Breckenridge a few years ago. Ventilation stacks that look like miniature versions of what you find on an old cruise ship. Brian and Pat built a lip and went back the next evening. After 3 straight weeks of shooting or building almost every day, Ryan was done with his bright, photogenic, and very threadbare shirt.